It was a typical humid summer evening in Charleston, South Carolina, July 15th, 2019, when I decided to take my new drone out for a spin. The air was thick, almost tangible, with the scent of jasmine mingling with the salty breeze from the harbor. I was at a relatively empty park, the kind of place where the grass seemed to glow under the setting sun, casting long shadows that danced slowly as the wind moved. I set the drone up, feeling a bead of sweat roll down my temple, its trail cooling in the gentle breeze. The drone buzzed to life, its lights flickering like the first stars in the twilight sky. As I guided it up and away, I watched through the screen as the drone's camera captured the changing hues of the sky, from pale blue to deep oranges and purples. The view was breathtaking, and for a moment, I felt detached from the world below, a silent observer from above. I decided to fly it over to the old part of town, curious to see the historic buildings from this new vantage point. The drone hummed obediently, soaring over streets lined with ancient oaks, their Spanish moss hanging like ghostly veils. The architecture below was a patchwork of history, from colonial-era homes to Victorian mansions, all basking in the golden hour's glow. As I maneuvered the drone closer to one particularly grand but dilapidated mansion, I noticed something odd about one of the windows. It was open, which wasn't strange in itself during a summer evening, but something fluttered in the breeze from inside that caught my eye. It was a curtain, but not just any curtain. This one seemed to move against the wind, twisting and coiling like a trapped animal trying to escape. Intrigued, I flew the drone closer, adjusting the focus to get a better look. The mansion's facade was a masterpiece of decay. Its once vibrant colors faded to ghostly hues, and ivy clung to its surface like green veins on pale skin. The window in question was on the second floor, tall and arched, with glass panes that reflected the dying light in a mosaic of colors. The curtain inside was old and tattered, its fabric thin and dancing with every breath of wind. But as I watched, I realized it wasn't just the wind moving it. Shadows shifted behind it, shapes that were too deliberate, too purposeful to be mere tricks of the light. My heart started to race, the drone's controls suddenly slippery in my hands. I zoomed in further, the drone's camera now fixated on the window, the rest of the world falling away until there was nothing but the mystery of what lay inside. The shadows moved again, and for a split second, I saw a face. It was pale, almost too pale, with eyes that seemed to stare right back at me through the lens. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the room. My initial fascination turned to unease. The air around me felt heavier, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I decided to pull the drone back, intending to return to the safety of familiar streets and away from the secrets of that old mansion. But as I tried to navigate it home, the controls responded sluggishly, as if the drone was reluctant to leave. Then, without warning, the screen flickered and went dark. Panic surged through me as I frantically tried to re-establish the connection, but it was as if the drone had vanished into thin air. The last image burned into my mind was that window, that curtain, and the fleeting glimpse of something unimaginably other lurking within. I stayed at the park until nightfall, hoping against hope that the drone would miraculously return. But it never did. The walk back to my car was one of the longest of my life. Every shadow a lurking figure, every rustle of leaves a whisper from unseen lips. The experience haunted me, not just for the loss of an expensive piece of equipment, but for the glimpse into a world that I was never meant to see. The night after the incident was restless, filled with dreams that were more memories than fabrications, replaying the moment I saw that face at the window over and over again. On the next day, I decided to go look for my lost drone. After all, I had spent over $2,000 on it. Besides, I was extremely curious about the faces it had captured the day before, eager to retrieve the lost drone and its memory card. With the daylight bolstering my courage, I decided to go back to the mansion. I arrived in the late morning, the sun high and bright, a stark contrast to the dim twilight of my last visit. The mansion stood as I remembered, grand and desolate, a relic of a bygone era surrounded by modern life that seemed to move on without it. The gate was unlocked, a surprising discovery that felt like an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. With each step up the weed-cracked path, the air grew still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The front door was ajar, another silent invitation. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust and decay, a scent that spoke of long years of neglect. Sunlight filtered in through dirty windows, casting hazy beams that illuminated floating dust motes, making them look like slow-moving stars in a forgotten galaxy. I made my way through the entrance hall, my footsteps echoing in the empty space, every sound amplified by the silence. The decor was a time capsule of luxury, with faded wallpapers and cracked moldings hinting at the opulence that once was. I found the staircase, its wood creaking under my weight, every step a loud proclamation of my presence in this slumbering house. The second floor was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, each doorway a dark mouth whispering secrets of the past. I found the room with the open window, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the room was bathed in a melancholy light, dust particles dancing in the sunbeams like tiny ghosts. The curtain, that mysterious, moving curtain, hung limply now, its secret keeper gone. The room was empty, save for an old, rotting chair facing the window, its back to the door as if someone had been sitting there, watching the world outside. I approached the window, looking out at the view that the drone had captured in its final moments. Suddenly, something white in a dark corner caught my eye. Walking over, I discovered it was my drone, as if someone had tossed it there, with one of its propellers broken off. I hurried over to pick it up, feeling a mix of surprise and sadness, yet relieved that propellers are relatively easy to replace. However, my mind was flooded with questions. How did my drone, which was supposed to be outside, end up in a corner of this abandoned house? I wiped the drone off a bit, then turned it to check the memory card slot. Luckily, the memory card was still there. My heart raced as I pocketed the card, hastily making my way out of the mansion, like the weight of countless unseen eyes upon me as I left. Back in the safety of my home, I inserted the memory card into my computer, my hands trembling with anticipation and fear. The card contained only one file, a video. The footage was shaky, likely taken as the drone fell. But in the last few seconds, the camera stabilized, pointing directly at the window. There, in clear view, was the face, paler and more distinct than I remembered. And then, the video ended, leaving me with more questions than answers. Who was this person? Were they trapped in some form within the mansion? It was late October of 2016. I worked at the local marina, a collection of docks and warehouses that had seen better days but served as a hub for the fishermen and pleasure boaters alike. One evening, as I was closing up the office, I noticed a thick fog rolling in from the sea, swallowing the boats and obscuring the far end of the pier. Fog was common here, but there was something unnervingly dense and rapid about this particular bank. As the visibility dropped to near zero, I heard the sound of an old engine coughing and sputtering through the fog. It was unusual for a boat to come in this late, especially with such poor visibility. Concerned for their safety, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down the slippery dock toward the sound. The boat that emerged from the fog was unlike any I had seen at this marina. It was an old fishing trawler, its paint peeling and rust marking its hull like battle scars. The name Eleanor was barely visible on the stern, faded by salt and time. The engine cut out as it neared the dock, and for a moment, everything was silent but for the lapping of the waves against the wood. An old man, his face weathered and lined with age, stood at the helm. He was dressed in an old fisherman's sweater and a cap that looked as though it had seen many a storm. "Can you help me tie off?" he called out, his voice surprisingly strong for his frail appearance. Puzzled by his sudden appearance, but compelled to help, I secured the Eleanor to the dock. The old man thanked me, his eyes glinting with a mix of gratitude and something else I couldn't quite place. Was it sorrow? Or perhaps fear? He told me he had been caught out at sea by the fog, which wasn't unusual, but there was a hesitancy in his voice that suggested there was more to his story. Before I could inquire further, he asked for directions to the nearest inn, his intention to return to the sea come morning. I pointed him toward Main Street, where he could find lodging and a warm meal. As he walked away, I felt an inexplicable chill, despite the fog beginning to dissipate. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. The Eleanor was still there, rocking gently in the calm water. Something about the old man's visit nagged at me, urging me to take a closer look. What I found on board the trawler sent a shiver down my spine and propelled me into an investigation that would unearth a long-forgotten tragedy. In the cabin of the Eleanor, amidst the expected detritus of a life at sea, was a logbook. Its pages were yellowed with age, but the entries were legible, pinned in a meticulous hand. The last entry was dated October 27, 1971, exactly 50 years to the day before the old man's visit. It spoke of a storm, a lost crew, and a promise to return home. A promise that seemed to have been fulfilled in the most unimaginable way. Intrigued and unsettled, I took to the town archives, digging through decades of records and newspapers. What I uncovered was a tragedy that had slipped through the cracks of our town's history. The Eleanor had indeed gone out to sea on October 27, 1971, but it was reported lost with all hands. No trace of the boat or its crew was ever found, until now. The old man, it appeared, was Thomas Eldridge, the Eleanor's captain, a man who had been mourned and then faded from memory. But how could a man lost at sea 50 years ago return on the very night that marked the anniversary of his disappearance? The answers, I fear, are as intangible as the fog that brought the Eleanor back to our docks. Some in town whisper of a pact with the sea, others of a ghost ship doomed to return until its story is told. But one thing is clear. The waters around our town hold depths we do not understand, currents that flow beyond the reach of time and mortality. As for the Eleanor, she was gone the next morning, vanished as mysteriously as she had arrived, leaving behind only the logbook and a lingering sense of wonder and dread. The sea had reclaimed its own, but the memory of that night remains, a reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknowable, the living and the dead. In the wake of the Eleanor's mysterious reappearance and equally enigmatic departure, the town found itself caught in a whirlwind of speculation and unease. The logbook, with its haunting final entry, became a focal point of interest among the locals, a tangible link to a past that had suddenly intruded upon the present. My discovery was met with a mix of fascination and apprehension as people struggled to make sense of the impossible. Word of the incident spread beyond our town, drawing attention from the curious and the skeptical alike. Some came in search of answers, others in pursuit of ghostly tales to add to their collections. But as the days passed and the initial shock faded, the story of the Eleanor and her captain began to settle into the fabric of local lore. A ghostly anecdote that enlivened the town's history but seemed to drift away with the tide. Living in a small town in the Midwest, you wouldn't expect much in the way of excitement or danger. My name's Rodolfo, and I was a sophomore in college, coming home for the summer. The story begins on a stifling, hot evening. I was back home, working a summer job at the diner, saving up for the next semester. It was a Friday night, which meant the diner was buzzing with the usual crowd. Locals winding down after a week's work and teenagers with nowhere else to go. After my shift ended around 9 p.m., I decided to take a walk. The sun had set, but the heat lingered, making the air feel thick and heavy. I wandered aimlessly, enjoying the solitude and the silence, a stark contrast to the hustle of the diner. That's when I noticed a car I didn't recognize, a sleek, black sedan, cruising slowly down Main Street. It wasn't unusual to see out-of-towners, especially during the summer, but something about this car felt off. It moved too slowly, as if surveying the town, its windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. I shook off the uneasy feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. Small towns have a way of making anything unfamiliar seem ominous. I continued my walk, eventually looping back towards my house, which sat on a quiet street a few blocks from the diner. As I turned onto my street, I saw it again. The black sedan, parked a few houses down from mine. This time, there was no mistaking it. The car was here for a reason, and something in my gut told me it wasn't anything good. I quickened my pace, hoping to slip inside without drawing attention. I made it home without incident, locking the door behind me. My parents were out of town for the weekend, a frequent occurrence now that I was older, leaving me alone in the house. Normally, the solitude was a welcome respite, but tonight, the silence felt oppressive, charged with a sense of foreboding. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak and groan of the house set me on edge. I peeked out the window several times, but the street was empty, the sedan gone. Sometime after midnight, I decided to head to bed, convincing myself I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. I checked all the locks, a habit ingrained in me since childhood, before turning off the lights and climbing upstairs. I was about to drift off to sleep when I heard it, a soft thud, like something being set down gently on the front porch. My heart skipped a beat. It was probably nothing, a neighbor's cat or a late package delivery, I told myself. But the timing, the stillness of the night, made every little sound seem amplified, sinister. Lying in bed, I debated what to do. My phone was on the nightstand, a silent guardian in the darkness. I could call someone, but who? The police? Over a noise that could easily be explained away as the wind? I couldn't. Not yet. I decided to investigate, a decision fueled more by a need to prove to myself that I was being irrational than any real desire to confront a potential intruder. I grabbed my phone, using it as a flashlight, and crept downstairs. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I made my way to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there for a moment, gathering my courage, before flipping on the porch light and peering through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. Feeling a mix of relief and foolishness, I turned to head back upstairs. That's when I saw it, a shadow passing by the living room window, quick and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. There was someone out there, someone who had been watching, waiting. I didn't scream. Instead, I froze, my mind racing. The phone in my hand suddenly felt like a lifeline. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I whispered my address to the operator, explaining that I'd noticed someone outside and wasn't sure if I'd entered my home. The operator's calm voice instructed me to stay on the line and find a safe place to hide until the police arrived. I chose the closet under the stairs, a cramped space filled with coats and old shoes, but it felt secure, hidden. I listened to the silence of the house, punctuated by my own shallow breaths, waiting for the sound of sirens or the shatter of glass. But there was nothing, just the oppressive, suffocating quiet. Minutes passed like hours until I finally heard the distant wail of a police siren, a sound that had never been so welcome. I stayed hidden until I heard the firm knock of the police at the front door, announcing their presence. Emerging from my hiding place, I opened the door to find two officers, their faces a blend of concern and professionalism. They took my statement, checked the property, and found nothing. No sign of the mysterious visitor or the black sedan. The officers suggested it might have been someone casing the neighborhood, a small comfort that did little to ease my shaken nerves. They promised to patrol the area more frequently over the next few days and advised me to stay with friends or family if possible. After they left, the house felt even emptier, the shadows longer and darker. I couldn't stay there, not alone. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house, leaving behind the silence and the fear. But the fear didn't leave me. It followed, a constant reminder of how quickly safety can be shattered by the unknown. I never saw the black sedan again, but the memory of that night lingered, a haunting echo of what might have been lurking just beyond the light.